this is an awkward one. Okay. So, I only seem to make these videos when I look like absolute hell. But it's because, where's the camera on this thing? Because I've got a landscape. It's because I think when I'm working my own process is when I start to understand more stuff, and then I want to share it. And I'll explain why more as well. There's a video, a couple of videos ago, made in December, I think, and I'm quite thin, and in it I say it's not anorexia. As it turns out, it is. And this is the way this dis-ease thing works, this addiction thing works. I would prefer to say self-medication or coping skills. This is the way they work. So I had an eating disorder in I'm a sexual abuse survivor, sexual abuse and trauma survivor from my childhood, and it started when the abuse was happening. It was more anorexia nervosa, controlling amounts of food. I got very, very thin. And then there were always food issues, either overeating, I think it's emotional eating, and also to make myself less attractive over the years as a defense mechanism. Or that was mostly it. Or when I was in my 20s and I started to use ecstasy and marijuana, I shared the trauma for the first time about the sexual abuse, and that's when it kicked off again, the anorexia. And then it's been fine for a long while. And last year I went through a hectic life challenge. I'm still in it. And it seems to have kicked off again. And this is why I feel like sharing is so important, because I go to support groups for my addiction. And this eating thing is an addiction. And I don't even like the word addiction anymore. These are sort of coping mechanisms to deal with avoiding feelings. So last year was very hectic for me, and there is some trauma around it. I've just acknowledged, and I went to see a therapist yesterday to specifically deal with that trauma. And I could see her looking at, people have been looking at me strangely, people that I haven't seen for some time. I can see it on their faces, but they don't want to say anything. And this is the weird part about this particular dangerous coping mechanism, is that I can't actually tell. It's body dysmorphia, apparently. I can't tell, I can't see how I look. So I've been wondering, like, people have been saying you're really thin. And I've been saying, you know, I had a hard time, there were challenges, but I've been in heavy denial about my eating patterns. And I've picked up some new addictions, coping mechanisms with regards to eating or not eating specifically, and overtraining, which is kind of orthorexia related. It's a very complex thing. I don't know much about it, so I'm not going to share much about it until I've worked with a professional, because it's a dangerous and insidious. There's a lot of denial around it. But the importance of sharing and going to support groups is that this week I kept seeing people with eating disorders in the group. And one, it is heartbreaking, was really, really hectic, and she looked at me like there was this, and I was still in complete denial. And then finally I went to my home group, and there was a woman there who I've known in recovery for a long time, and she looked at me strangely. So I just asked her straight out, because nobody has said really, I guess, I mean, they've said you got so thin, but I was in denial. And now I was kind of curious. So I said to her, am I really thin? Have I lost a lot of weight? And she looked at me and she said, I don't know, because I've got body dysmorphia. And so we began to chat, and she shared her journey. And so light bulbs started to go off, and I guess I started to see my behaviors a bit more clearly. And yesterday I shared with the therapist that I went to try and handle this trauma, because I feel like I'm stuck after last year. I'm struggling in some areas, and it's not me. The behaviors are not me. It's very unlike me. If you look at the video before, the hooping video, it also, when I saw it, I was like, wow, okay, because I guess I wasn't seeing myself, around the house. That stoop, that hunch, and then I've had chronic back pain for months, and it's depression related. It's like such denial. I knew I was suffering from depression last year, but I managed to come right with it. Without meds, naturally, it was slow though, and it was hard. And I'll put those tools up. But that posture, it's like this ongoing, physical ailment now. So now I'm also, anyway, it's another story, but I'm now investigating very much somatic stuff and the mind-body connection. It's fascinating. It's like so much to learn here. Yeah, so that, and then seeing other people's reactions to the weight loss, because initially it was financially related. I went through a patch where I've never in my life, I couldn't afford food. I've never. It was a personal crisis, and not entirely, in fact mostly not my doing, but my reaction to it was my doing. And I didn't react well. I should have been smarter. So it initially started off with that, and I'm left now with this lingering, which the therapist looked at me in shock, because then I think it's more trauma related. It's a blend of her saying, I'm afraid to spend money on food, and I'm rationing myself. So, because there was a time last year that I went to bed hungry for the first time in my life. Not so fun. So there's stuff, but it's very, very interesting. So I just wanted to come out and say, it looks like it is an eating disorder, and it is being addressed. The final veil of denial got lifted this week, and it was once again a relief to go and seek help and address it. It's funny that I work this program, and the first step is powerlessness, and someone shared in a meeting this week that it was only through admitting they were powerless and seeking help that they gained their power back, which I thought was really cool. So yeah, so there's that. So when you see the videos, it's that, but I'm on it, I'm addressing it, and this is why I feel it's so important to share, because if other people hadn't shared with me, this could have gone on. And apparently, which is what this girl shared, who's had an ongoing battle in it for many years, it's not something I've dealt with in a hardcore way since my 20s, so I don't know much about it. She said it can accelerate really badly, and that one needs to move quite quickly. So wherever she is, thanks for sharing honestly. And I've been working on trust for the last 2 months, because I've seen questions on various channels that I follow of people asking, how do they trust again after a toxic relationship, after a very hectic, traumatic, toxic relationship. So I started to investigate that. It's really complicated for me. So I've made lots of notes, but I've had no real final resolution with that yet. And I feel that possibly the trauma counseling is going to be the final key that opens the door for that one. So I'll be back with a share on that when as well is at the end of the therapy session. This person that I went to see for the trauma stuff, because my thinking is not me. I'm very negative and I'm quite bitter, and I'm really struggling with trusting in after last year. When I said to her at the end, I had an eating disorder in my 20s, and I think it's resurfaced with this, just nodded and smiled and said, yes, I can see, and that we're going to address that too. It was awesome just to have someone say, yeah, I can see this is happening. What a relief. And so I did reach out after that session to another counselor who deals with this specifically in recovery, because I was sitting outside in my car and I just wasn't hungry and I could not eat, and I knew I had to. And we had a conversation and her and I might get this quote wrong. She said something like, treat yourself like a young child, and what would you feed that child? What would that child like to eat? Something like that. But by that stage, I had already shared with another friend the thoughts and the behaviors around it, the wanting to be smaller, to disappear, the control, that it was a way of taking power back over my body because that had been taken away from me. What else is it related to for me? Because like I say, I don't know too much about this. It's fear of rejection, because I had a primary caregiver who was in an industry that was very appearance orientated, and when it surfaced the opposite way, when I began to overeat as a young child, before actually the sexual abuse, he berated me, and it was his stuff. And this is why also this sharing is so important, because I've spoken about my dysfunctional family, because this stuff gets passed on, and it's actually the not sharing, it's the not being open and honest about feelings and experiences. And I've come to understand it's not actually the family that's dysfunctional after last year, it's society that's dysfunctional. The tribe. People don't want to address the ugly truth about a lot of stuff that's happening out there that is not healthy at all. And so I think the family, everybody's trying to avoid being shamed and rejected by the tribe, and so this gets perpetuated. Which is why one learns to share honestly in recovery, and it's why I began to share about my experience online, because I don't even see these as mental health issues anymore. These are learned behaviors and surety coping and survival mechanisms, and we are running around with a whole bunch of depressed and anxious people and addicts. And in my opinion, it's no wonder at all. And then we're medicating them, or saying that they're mentally ill. It's a mess. In that meeting where I met that girl, I couldn't focus properly, because I think I had to go over my history this week again, and it triggers stuff for me. But now I'm aware of it, so I'm sitting there not being able to focus and picking up words, I guess, that are relevant to my story, that are making light bulb moments happen, which is why this group dynamic is so phenomenal, because by hearing somebody else's experience, it really helps me put pieces of the puzzle together for me. I'm like, oh, I do that. And when they share, you know, about their journey, I'm like, oh, maybe I could do that. And I'm hearing this voice again, this little girl voice of, it's my fault. It's my fault. But because I'm sober, I can curiously look at this stuff now. If there's any chance of dealing with mental health, then it's taken away, it's removed. Recovery is removed completely, in my personal experience, if people are using substances to self-medicate, because one never gets to really see with clarity the emotions and feelings and thoughts attached to triggers. And it's only through actually what I've experienced through being triggered and not being able to escape the feelings, that the dots are connected, and then the feelings being put together with the thought is my understanding, from what I've seen from people who know more about this. That's what helps the brain process the experience and then heal the trauma. And it's not an instantaneous thing in my experience either. It can take a few goes before it's easy to acknowledge and go, oh, that's that thing, and then hopefully not act out. But it's so sneaky, like because I've stopped using substances and alcohol and relationships, it's shifted back into the food. It's cunning. So I've clocked it. What this other clinical psychologist friend who deals with eating disorders specifically also said was that this particular addiction coping mechanism is a minefield, and I can see a bit why now, giving it some thought, because there's so many ways that one can use it. So instead of running today, I walked. When I was sitting in the car and reaching out, saying, what do I do? And her saying, what would you feed? Because I'm not hungry and I haven't eaten and I know I have to eat. And this is why I think one has to move so quickly, because if that progresses, I can imagine how difficult it must be for a person to break free of that thinking. For me, it was, if I eat something bad, it's going to happen. It's a control thing at the moment, because I was so out of control last year, and my life was so out of control. And I was desperately asking for help, and I was not being heard. I was ignored. I was told I was lying. I was called crazy. And that's the trauma I'm dealing with now. And so I think this was a way of taking some control and power back. And then also very much around my childhood stuff, my fear of being rejected, not loved, if I wasn't perfect. When I got back onto the clinical psychologist, counselor person's WhatsApp thread, and I thank her for responding so quickly. And she said, what would you feed a child? What would you say to that young child? What would she like to eat? I had already gone in my head, excuse the language, this is bullshit, just fucking eat something. You know what to do and you know what it is. And I think that's my recovery kicking in. The stuff that I've learned from other humans further along the journey. So I got out the car and I went to my fridge, which was full of beautiful, healthy, home-cooked vegan food, and I made myself a plate of amazing food, and I sat down, and as I smelt it, I realized how hungry I was, and I ate it. It sounds simple, but if this thing progresses, I don't think it's that simple at all. Because the resistance I felt to doing it, even though I knew I had to in the car, was real. It was a fear. It was actual fear that if I did, something bad was going to happen. This stuff is deep. So this morning I walked instead of ran, because I'm going to wait for the professionals to help me balance out before I let this thing go any further. Okay, ready for the day. There was an addendum, which was I'm going to share a video about toxic relationships next, and how they have worked for me, and why it is part of the addiction cycle, the addictive cycle. Hello, big guy. He's so cute. Because you know, watching other women and men who have come out of these relationships, and the destruction that it wreaks on them psychologically, mentally, is horrific. So I just wanted to share that I lied. It's black or white thinking, and that's part of the dis-ease. Because when I did share, and I have to do this when I go into that victim mode of nobody believes me, that's something from my past. It's what another life, I wish I was a life coach. It's what a life coach called Richard Grannon talks about, which is emotional flashbacking, from complex post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder. So so that nobody believes me, it was not so. When I shared and I tried to get help, because I was desperate and scared, I didn't expect this to unfold at all the way it did. And part of my trauma is I used to be like a goody two-shoes, running around trying to save everybody and you know, rescue people as part of my codependent stuff. And no, you don't know what codependence means, chances are, so don't judge me until you know. It's interesting stuff. But yeah, goody two-shoes was that I was very naive, and part of my recovery has been, this life coach calls it toxic naivety, for people like me that pick these relationships. I call it neurotic naivety. It's like I had to believe that people were inherently good because their alternative was just too hectic to contemplate. And this process showed me that people are not inherently good all the time, and that the majority of people are, and I'm going to be philosophical here because my pain body, as Eckhart Tolle would call it, is going, humanity's shit and all people suck and nobody cares and people just walk on by, and you know, I just want to drop out and disappear and excuse my language, fuck the world, I want to get off. But this is not true. That's the black or white thinking. That's part of the dis-ease. Because when I woke up one morning in that mindset of I just don't want to be here anymore, I don't want to participate, and I don't want to help people because it's all a mess, I wrote down the people that actually did reach out and didn't walk on by, and there were 30 names within a minute and a half, without thinking. So yeah, they're not many, because I think most people are just scared, yeah, maybe I got to stop taking it so personally. It's also a good lesson. The best part of this unfolding of events was that it really taught me that, you know, people pleasing is a part of my challenges. And it really got me over that. That's the codependent stuff, people pleasing, putting other people's needs ahead of my own, rescuing other people before taking care of myself. And I got, it was so brutal. It was so, okay, frig everybody. I don't care. Like a child, I don't care. That it was also quite liberating. I finally found the ability to say no, and not feel guilty. So look, there are perks as well. I think there's just a bit of stuff I do need to address, because there's some issues now around trust. Obviously, it's like being pulled, out of the matrix, and yeah, it was like that. It was like, holy cow. This is how people work. This is how the world works. So yeah, neurotic naivety. Because I'm not an idiot, despite what I've been told by some of my sterling choices of partner. And I'll explain more why that happens and what to look out for on both sides, because for them, if you are one of these personalities, and we both come from the same background, that's the interesting part. We both come from a very similar background, and it'll either split off into people pleasing, or somebody that's has got quite strong narcissistic traits and is quite unempathetic. So one will disassociate and one will overcompensate empathically. Both from the same background, but depending on whether there was one or two slight changes in the environment, it's interesting stuff. But if you are on, the less empathic, more manipulative, less honest, more takey side of the scale, and you picking people like me because we're easy to trigger and manipulate, basically, that's the bottom line. Plus, we're quite emotionally reactive, which I think someone that doesn't have that gets a kick out of. They like feed off it, because it's quite, because they don't. You could kill someone. You could actually kill someone that you love. And I'm watching this in a relationship with a friend, and he genuinely loves her, and he's triggering the fuck out of her. Excuse my language. Again, I've got to work on it. And yeah, so this stuff needs to be discussed more, opened up for discussion, all of this. Anyway, I'm on to fetch my kids now. I'm back, I'm grounded, and I'm doing the next right thing. This journey started off initially as me realizing late in life that I was making the same bad choices, and that it wasn't just trying to escape with substances, which I did intentionally. Initially, I was in a very toxic environment, and I chose to start drinking at about 4 o'clock every day, just to make the situation bearable. And then a life situation or circumstance happened that kind of accelerated it into full-on active alcoholism, which I'm in recovery for. And that was around 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago. And I've been in and out of recovery ever since, and on this journey of self-discovery. It's an incredible journey. Initially, it started out with me finding, I got very, very into recovery, and obviously had an interest in addiction and how it works. And I found a gentleman called Gabor Mate, who's an addiction specialist, and he also deals with the mind-body connection. Incredible individual with amazing work. And his statement from many years ago, which people seem to finally be cottoning onto, is that addiction is self-medication and it's all trauma related. So my question was, if the trauma can be healed or processed, will the addiction abate? And the journey's been that for me ever since. I've spent 3 years processing so much stuff, because I was acting out as a kid. I've got a history of sexual abuse, and then a rape, and then getting myself into dangerous situations due to early use of alcohol and acting out, there's a lot of trauma. Okay, so in the toxic relationship, I ended up coming out with anxiety and depression. Mm. And I found some tools online that definitely do help with that. I'm off meds now. The anxiety and depression has abated. As far as the addiction goes and it being curable, this has just sidelined me completely because they say in the program I work that it's cunning and baffling. Now this just, my alcohol addiction shifted into food. I had a tough year last year with a toxic individual, using something from my past, which was one of the original triggers for the eating disorder, which I now, thinking back, realize was my first addiction. And when I speak of addiction, I've said it before, it's a coping mechanism for me to avoid feelings. And it started with food. I'm thinking back, it started with sugar. It started with eating a lot of sugary things, making sugary things, and putting them in the fridge and eating them. And I gained a lot of weight. And then it went to, when the sexual abuse happened, more of an anorexia nervosa, controlling amounts of food that I was eating, and I got really, really thin. And it's kind of been an on and off challenge throughout my life, thinking back on it, either overusing food to avoid feelings and gaining weight for protection. And there's other things around it. So I'm busy investigating this now, like I said, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but I can see quite clearly now how it links together. What I am understanding it is that it's, as I'll read or write the SMS from an eating disorder specialist, that it's a minefield because it can be used in so many different ways and come out in so many different ways. So as far as there being a cure for addiction, in my experience so far in 5 years of trying to beat it, not yet. It shifts. It just shifts and changes and comes out in various ways. The only success I've had in arresting it is through a program that I work. I do believe there are other ways of doing this because the main goal of that program is very much about being present. And I find when I'm present, I mean, it's obvious, it's quite clear that the triggers from the past trauma are what create the acting out in the present. And then the fear, because of the trauma of what might happen, that the world is a dangerous place, creates the acting out in the present. And the acting out is the addictive behaviors, self-destructive behaviors, and avoiding feeling the feelings. So I'm still going to carry on seeing whether, where this goes. I also didn't believe that addiction was a disease. There's a disease model that I find somewhat old-fashioned, but I'm not an expert. And please, everything I'm sharing is my own personal experience and journey. And it's things that I've gleaned off the internet, bits and pieces. And from other people that are further along the path and professionals. So, yeah, my take is that, find people that you trust to listen to, find stuff that works for you. And part of the journey is both handing over power in that respect, accepting that one needs help, and also taking power back by taking responsibility for your own recovery, my own recovery. So, what did I want to say? Oh, so the disease model. Didn't believe it. was firmly ensconced in the view that it's all trauma and abuse related as well, the same as anxiety and depression, because that I've seen personally for me could be healed. That's gone. Unless I'm in an environment with toxic people and dysfunction from my past, which seems to trigger it again. And this whole addiction thing, it's not, and trauma and mental health, it's not just one person. I've come to realize as well, it's very much a family orientated dysfunction. If you do research on the black sheep or the scapegoat of the family, there'll be one member that's more sensitive usually and dare I say emotionally intelligent or honest about what's happening, that will get targeted as the sick person that the rest of the dysfunction can get offloaded onto. And it's not their fault either. It gets passed on from generation to generation of this is how we work, this is the way we do things. And that gets passed on from society and keeping up with the Joneses of these are the things we don't talk about because you'll be judged and excommunicated from the tribe. So the stuff runs like really, really deep. There is a recovery place in Cape Town that is doing family work around all of this stuff. It's the first time I've seen it, and I was like, hallelujah. I'm not religious at all, but hallelujah. You know, somebody's jumping onto the fact that this is a system failure and not just one individual's personal challenge. And there are, yeah, I don't want to mention names at this point, but probably if you Google search, you will find stuff like that. If you have kids that are struggling with mental health or addiction and you really want them to get better, as a parent, I have done it with my own kids. I have offered therapy and I've offered same group support because I'm completely aware that I've learned behaviors from my elders that are not very healthy. And in my opinion, the faster they get on it for their own journeys, the better. So we all need to heal together and take responsibility for ourselves. It's not just one individual that needs help. It's not just the addict or the you know, mentally ill so-called person. It's the entire family structure. Awkward. And like I said, I don't mean it. This is learned. This is learned. This is multi-generational insanity that just gets passed on, that is considered normal. It's not normal. So on we go. I'm lucky enough to have a you know, a family that is open to discussing honestly and growing with me. So it's pretty cool. But I've also had to put down really hardcore boundaries and had to do some scary stuff to you know, to stop that that play. It's like a play. It's like a play where everybody has roles. And I'm not sure yet whether it can be done in perpetuity or whether just a loving distance is better for mental health in some situations. I think that depends on the system and the people involved. So back to the disease model. So I figured the same thing from a far more educated person than I on this, Mr. Mate, that possibly if one healed the initial trauma, that the addictive behaviors would subside. The problem in my experience was last year I was thrown into a hectic life challenge, and a person, a very toxic individual, used my history with sexual abuse to try and derail my current living arrangements, which I even knew at the time that it was one of my triggers. And then a set of circumstances, which is usually what happens in my experience with addiction, unraveled. That was it was a replay, and possibly because I reacted in the same way as before. It was a replay of past events. Excuse me, it's my tummy rumbling. I have eaten because now at least I'm aware of what's happening. I'm eating and I've stopped overtraining, and I'm seeking help. But this totally blindsided me. For for a long time. So part of the challenge last year was financial. I have never been so broke. Some agreements were broken. My support structure was removed deliberately, partly because of my reactions as well, and a lot to do with being other people purposely discrediting my attempt to share the story to garner support, quite brutally. And I was left on my own, fighting a justice system that is not geared up to deal with this kind of thing. They're overwhelmed, simply. And I became obsessed about trying to get the truth out. Dishonesty and not being heard are two of my biggest triggers. That's from my history as well. So all of these things came together, and I started to ration. I had to at one point ration food because I didn't know when I was going to be able to eat again, and I was making sure that my son had adequate nutrition. And it's somehow connected into the original anorexia, and I've realized recently that I've become afraid to spend money on food. So it's reared its head in a different way, but with the same eating patterns, all fear related and once again abuse related. So I'm investigating now. It's very, very interesting. I don't know if this disease, and I will go back into that now, is curable now, because it's sneaky. It shifts and changes and comes out in so many different ways for me. So this was a very interesting realization about a week ago. And if I hadn't been in the program that I'm in and going, thank the gods, to support groups and being aware of the nature of this illness or behavior, I would have, it's been going on for like some months. I would say 8 months it's been going on, and I was in complete denial. Complete denial. Unbelievable the way the human mind works. So I'm quite stunned, but I'm also quite intrigued. Like I say, I'm taking action, which is great, which is recovery, and I'm doing the next right thing. I'm also humbled once again by my own mind and how sneaky it is, and willing to listen again, seeking help again. But I'm good, mostly. I'm fucking angry, excuse my language, which I think is a good thing. At society's general lack of ethics, courage. I'm disillusioned, but I'm dealing with that as well. I think there's some post-traumatic stress, which is why I went to see this person as well. It was when I was with her that I said, I think my eating disorder might have reappeared, and she just looked at me blankly and was kind of like, yeah, I can see. So in safe hands. As far as it being a disease, I was very convinced that it wasn't. It was all trauma and abuse related. But I'm doing a course with people that are much more educated and far along the path than me about this stuff. And they did show a movie about the disease model of addiction. And there was a lot of stuff that I was like, oh, that's very old-fashioned. There was a lot of stuff linking it to the brain and the way that the brain chemistry works. And as it turns out, it works on the same area. And I'm not a brain person. I'm going to be researching this now because I'm curious, but I want to put this out there before I forget, because the next video I want to make is on plant medicines, because there seems to be this flurry of interesting plant medicines online, and I have something to share about that as well. Work on the addictive cycle works on the same area. It could be considered a disease then, but more research necessary. And there's also another video, I'll post a link below, that's linked opioid use to the same area of the brain that deals with connectivity and connection, which is also affected by early trauma. So if that stuff happens, it can change the makeup of the brain physically, which then would make sense if these substances and addictive behaviors work on those areas as well, that it could be considered a disease. So more research necessary, and a lot of learning. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I say, I'm no expert, but more to follow. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. Because also plant medicines and therapy can, and the brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity, which they thought stopped in your 20s, they've now researched actually continues. And with these new psychedelic therapies and making the brain very, very plastic, they can change it again. So we'll see. We'll see what the experts come up with all of the research. It's quite exciting that it's being done. I'll do stuff on plant medicines and my understanding of it next. Where I am right now is that being completely present is my main focus. That's my recovery, which means nothing that's mind altering at all, unless it's absolutely necessary. That's my take on it now. But I'll share some of my experience with using plant medicines and why I did in another video.